insecurity, poverty-related stress, quarantine and social isolation, inability to escape intimate partner violence. We also know that the burden of care for the sick and all the pathways that lead to an increased risk of domestic violence are there. There are also, we know, reduced health services available for victims of violence because we are also gearing the health sector towards provision of services for COVID-19 people. So what we have also heard, though, information is that women are turning to helplines in cases of domestic violence. What we have learned is that there's a 40% increase of calls to helplines in Malaysia, 50% increase in China and Somalia, 79% increase in Colombia, 400% increase in Tunisia. In Uruguay, we also heard of more calls, and also the unusual thing of people calling for guidance to third parties, friends, family members. So this is just obviously a confirmation that in health emergencies, women are affected. Violence against women increases. But also it's important to remember, this doesn't start with this pandemic. We have really already serious kind of quite, sobering numbers from before. And more digging into the topic for today, I would like to kind of just quote some of these numbers. In the violence and harassment are widespread problems in supply chains. 1/3 of women worldwide will experience physical and or sexual violence from men at some point in their lives. 60% of garment workers in India and Bangladesh have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. 1/3 of female garment workers in Cambodia had been sexually harassed in the past 12 months. This is data from the colleagues from the BSRI. So the numbers continue. You will hear more about these numbers when we go on, but I really now would like to introduce your panel. It's a fantastic panel full of expertise and in the field. And first of all, just to introduce myself, Angelica Pino, and I just joined the SVRI as a grants manager and capacity strengthening specialist. Our panel today, we have Shruti Majumdar, who is a monitor and evaluation specialist at the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Shruti has got more than a decade of experience in research and programming on violence against women at the World Bank and at the United Nations, particularly on women's economic empowerment and community-based approaches to access to justice. As the M&E specialist at the UN Trust Fund, a global grant-making mechanism administered by the UN Women, she provides direct programmatic and M&E support to civil society organizations working on violence against women. And she also leads the development and rollout of the Evidence Hub strategy and research partnership by the UN Trust Fund. Then we also have Tolu Lawrence, who is the Vice President of Strategic Growth and Engagement at Promundo. She has over a decade of experience bringing together leading nonprofits, foundations, social enterprises, and brands to develop and support mission-driven initiatives that further social good. She has also worked on campaigns with socially conscious brands, including Harris, Lucasfilms, Spotify, Unilever, and more. We also have from our colleagues at BSR, Lauren Chills, who is an Associate Director at Business for Social Responsibility, BSR, and leads the Impact and Influence agenda for HERproject, working with global and local companies, businesses, associations, donors, and partners to strengthen and amplify the impact of HERproject. We also have from BSR, Lucia Guevara, who is the manager and the global lead for HERrespect, a gender transformative program focused on promoting gender equality and tackling violence against women in the global supply chain. She works with brands, workplaces, and local community organizations to empower female factory workers in the areas of sexual and reproductive health and rights, financial inclusion, and gender relations. Then, moving to South Africa, we have Thulani Duma, who is the regional responsible sourcing manager for the Greater Continent, Greater Africa, at a company called The Children's Place. He has 25 years experience on EHA's management, social compliance, and auditing. Last but not least, we have Raania Rizvi, who is the social development advisor with the private sector department at DFID. She advises across the department on all poverty alleviation, social analysis, gender and inclusion aspects. and she recently focused on highlighting the pivotal role of the private sector in addressing gender-based violence. So this is our panel from today, and I invite you to join us. As I said, please keep an eye on the chat, comment, and post your questions, but we are going to move to the first presenter, and this is Shruti from the UN Trust Fund. Over to you, Shruti.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. What I will be focusing on today is how violence against women and girls and the work of civil society organizations in the front lines has been affected by COVID and the lockdown measures through the lens of the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women and our grantees. I hope everyone can see my presentation. And here we go. So to give a very quick overview of who we are, the Trust Fund is a global grant-making mechanism that came into being in 1996, and we support CSOs that work on ending violence against women and girls. Our grant period is about 3 years, and our active portfolio is 144 grants in 69 countries. Almost 60% of our grantees identify as women's rights organizations, and our grantees are spread across all regions. And they work on a range of issues from prevention to provision of services, and then those that work on policies, laws, and national action plans. In light of COVID and the lockdown measures that followed, we conducted a rapid assessment with our grantees, really sort of 4 objectives: assessing the impact of the outbreak on violence against women and girls, assessing the impact on CSO operations and programming, assessing their response and adaptations in the front lines, and assessing the needs of CSOs that are now, the short and long-term needs now sort of going forward. We gathered this data starting mid-March, where we sent out 10 open-ended questions to all of our grantees, and we're immensely grateful that all of them responded and sent multiple updates, which amounts to over 600 pages of qualitative data from 69 countries in 4 languages. And the responses are still coming in, so this is a living analysis. And these responses were then translated, analyzed, and trusted by Pino. So going right into the findings in terms of impact on violence against women and girls. Great. So our first finding is that grantees are reporting an alarming increase in violence against women and girls as the direct result of social isolation measures across all 5 regions that the Trust Fund operates in. And this is really occurring in multiple forms. The most common form that's been reported so far is intimate partner violence, triggered primarily by economic insecurity. There is an increase in child abuse and exploitation, FGM, early marriage. Sexual violence is on the rise, as reported through our grantees that operate shelters and helplines. Violence in humanitarian settings is on the rise. For instance, one of our grantees that operates a shelter and provides counseling to survivors of ISIS violence in Iraq reports a doubling of intake requests since the lockdown. Emotional and economic abuse as a direct result of food shortages is rising, particularly for women and girls with disabilities. And finally, femicides have increased. Plus, the militarization of daily life and an effort to enforce the lockdown has led to repression by law enforcement, particularly of women and girls who are leaving homes to fetch firewood and water for their families. And this is just to say it's not a static picture. The situation is constantly evolving, and so are the forms, frequency, and intensity of violence. A second finding is that there are multiple pathways through which risk factors for war have exacerbated and will increase the likelihood of violence even more. And CSOs have really drawn our attention to the sort of compounded effect of these pathways, because none of the following that I'll be talking about are occurring in isolation. These are co-occurring risk factors. So food shortages within a lockdown, school closures within a lockdown, lack of access to some of the institutions that our grantees have beneficiaries in, like hospitals, custodial institutions, quarantine centers, raises the risk of violence. Alcohol abuse, but also alcohol withdrawal is triggering abuse and humiliation within the household. And finally, limited public transport and within a lockdown implies that survivors are unable to pay for essential services. Even if survivors made it to essential services, access to these for the past 3 months has been completely disrupted in most parts of the world, particularly to healthcare, justice, and social protection. Survivors and vulnerable groups are struggling to access essential medical services and supplies. In in several countries, closed courts or arbitration only in urgent cases has impeded immediate judicial protection for survivors. In addition, in some countries, CSOs are reporting that survivors whose husbands were in custody for domestic violence have been released to minimize the spread of infection in corrective facilities. And finally, a lack of access to social protection, for example, closing national ID offices at this time, is particularly dangerous because it inhibits women and girls with disabilities from enrolling in social protection schemes, which would keep them out of any entitlements that may be provided at this time. Given all of the above constraints, CSOs claim that women and girls are largely underreporting through formal channels, police, health, etc., but they are disclosing and they are seeking help from informal community-based structures that have been set up and trained by CSOs. So relying on sort of administrative data at this time will not be enough, and listening to CSOs instead grounded in the voices of survivors will be critical. So that's the impact on women and girls. When it comes to the impact of the lockdown on CSOs in terms of programming, their own sort of programs and interventions, our grantees operating in all three areas are impacted. Prevention programs that typically use one of the following entry points to raise awareness and shift norms are all facing challenges. So those using schools cannot continue because of school closures, those using communities and face-to-face trainings and sessions can no longer do so. Those supporting small businesses run by at-risk women and survivors are now shutting down, and there's need for urgent business revival advice. Those working with marginalized groups like sex workers have lost access to beneficiaries overnight, several of them have gone underground. And for a field of work that really relies on face-to-face intense and frequent awareness sessions where going virtual is not that easy in several parts of the world, it's really pushing grantees to rethink their methodologies and the very mode of operation. When it comes to services, those that provide services themselves are experiencing a massive surge in intake, and they're now likening it to a situation, to a humanitarian crisis effectively. CSOs that are training essential services in survivor-centered approaches are also affected because those they train, as law enforcement agencies and healthcare workers in the front lines, are now completely diverted towards COVID-19 response and preparedness. And finally, CSOs that are pushing for progressive legislation are temporarily on hold as well because parliament sittings have been postponed in so many countries. And this has led to considerable lost momentum on the issue. In addition to programming, the pandemic and lockdown measures really put considerable strain on the organizations themselves, their capacity and their effectiveness. Their efforts are now focused on those that have been pushed into extreme poverty and starvation. Their premises are being diverted for COVID-19 testing by local governments. Those operating shelters and safe houses are struggling to procure food, maintain hygiene and healthcare. Frontline staff are stretched, overwhelmed. There is now limited or disrupted communications between staff and with communities. Limited bank operations are shaking up budgets, and there are constraints in fundraising as well. And finally, there are serious concerns about maintaining staff, consultants, and frontline workers, especially if the crisis continues for longer. When it comes to responding to the crisis in the front lines, grantees have shown an incredible amount of resilience by making programmatic adaptations in the midst of all this and really acting as first responders. And we've written about this in a paper that I will link in the chat. But just to say that to sustain those adaptations that grantees have made, there's an enormous need for additional resources for the following. For emergency needs, PPE, food, sanitation, and hygiene. For staff salaries, health insurance and communication, transport and self-care. For building internal capacity and to learn from other CSOs in other parts of the world dealing with the exact same issues at the exact same time. And they're really keen sort of for new ideas, solutions and partners and knowledge. And finally, CSOs are seeking flexibility to adjust project activities, timelines, and budgets to manage the surge, but also to prepare for once the lockdown is lifted, at which point they're expecting another surge. To wrap up, I'll say a little bit about how the UN Trust Fund is sort of responding to these needs. So we're supporting existing to swiftly respond to number 1 and 2. To respond to number 3, we're sharing resources and aim to launch a multilingual platform for knowledge exchange at this time between practitioners across the globe. On number 4, we're exercising utmost flexibility to enable grantees to modify or delay or reallocate budgets to respond to the crisis. And the need for sort of flexible funding at this time cannot be emphasized enough. Overall, we're also seeing an increased attention from the private sector, which is great. And they've been reaching out to see where we can create partnerships. And we're trying to facilitate these through direct contributions, but also through in-kind contributions and technical support. And finally, going beyond our existing portfolio and subject to increased resources, the Trust Fund aims to launch a global call for proposals outside its regular cycle to fund projects specifically designed to support long-term. So I'll stop here, and I hope this helps really sort of ground the discussion in the present moment, but also reiterates the importance and urgency of having this conversation at this time and enabling strong partnerships for a common goal of ending violence against women and girls. So thanks very much, and back to Angelica.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shruti. That's very interesting and quite sobering to hear. And I think it's fantastic the work you have done in terms of trying to assess the situation all over the world and being so accommodating with the grantees. I think it's really, really, that's what we need to be doing right now. And also good to hear about the interest of the private sector. So now I would like to move on to Tolu, who's going to tell us what has been good practices in engaging the private sector in the space of violence against women, prevention and response. What are also the pitfalls? What are the issues that we should be, taking? And so over to you, Tolu. Thank you so much. Tolu, I see you're in mute.
Yes, sorry, I was just getting my screen shared with you. One moment to do that. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we're all tuning in from different locations. I'm just glad to be here with you this morning. I am Vice President of Strategic Growth and Engagement at Promundo, which means that I manage our Workplace Advisors program. Our Workplace Advisors program is really the main arm through which we engage with the private sector. So today I'm going to just probably move through our first few slides pretty quickly, but just want to give you some background on how Promundo works, and introduce you a little bit to the work we do through Workplace Advisors. And then we'll just talk a little bit about some of the pillars that we use to guide our engagement that ultimately are put in place to kind of help us really work towards success and try to guard off some of the challenges that you might find in these types of engagements. And then we'll just end with a couple of quick case studies. I'll try to do all of that in this amount of time. And I know just being that I'm primarily really focusing today on consumer-facing engagement or public-facing engagement. So Promundo does do work internally with companies. We actually or projects that are working sort of within workplaces, but today we'll focus on some of the externally facing work. So Promundo was founded in Brazil in 1997, and it actually means for the world. The notion that gender equality is actually a social good for the world. And so we're an applied research organization really focused on advancing gender equality and creating a world free of violence. We do this by engaging men and boys in partnership with women, girls, and individuals of all gender identities. We really believe that working with men and boys to transform harmful gender norms and unequal power dynamics is a critical part of the solution to achieving gender equality and preventing violence. We primarily work with a three-pronged approach. And so this is in our intervention work through our programs. It also plays into how we engage with the private sector and the work that we do through the private sector. Among sort of our approaches are we conduct research that contributes to a knowledge base on masculinities and gender equality. We develop, evaluate, and scale up high impact gender transformative interventions and programs. We also carry out national and international campaigns and advocacy initiatives to prevent and promote gender equality. One of those being Men Care, that I think a few of you are familiar with. So Promundo's Workplace Advisors Program is really just sort of taking the work that we do out in the world and taking it within the context of the private sector and in the workplace. And so really our work is focused in two areas. I noted before, one of those areas is oriented toward the actual engagement in the workplace, sexual harassment training, gender equality, DEI initiatives. And another part of that work is really sort of turning that lens outside and understanding the power that brands and the reach of companies, what they have in the world. Really, it's how can we collaborate with them to leverage resources and access and reach to advance gender equality and to prevent violence. And one of the things about the workplace or the corporate sector is that because Promundo does primarily engage or think about solutions and engagement in voice. We found that there's a lot of opportunity to engage in a lot of spaces where it might be a little bit more difficult to convince folks that gender equality is relevant. I think a lot of times when we talk about gender, people think of that as a placeholder for women and girls. And part of our, what we work with companies to understand is that you can't just put it on the shoulders of women and girls to advance these issues, that it also really requires involvement of everybody. And so just a quick background in terms of how we partner. We usually begin with assessments and recommendations. We conduct research to better understand workplace dynamics taking place in the identified market or community. Based on that research and further engagement with the workforce or the communities in which the companies are positioned, we make recommendations that meet their specific needs or leverage, or if we're working within the workplace, if we're really sort of engaging community, then we're really thinking about the ways that we can leverage their avenues through which they might be positioned to be able to engage the consumers or the network that they are able to reach. And so some of the points here I've included are some of the high quality research that we're doing with them, some advising on HR policies, workplace culture, and then in terms of sort of more of the what we deliver, so the work that we're doing here is really working in close partnership with company, working hand in hand to make sure that any training and program we design is positioned for success. So we, in this work, we might partner on the development of social impact programs, might conduct research to gain consumer insights regarding gender equality to make sure that any kind of program that they're thinking about implementing is meeting individuals where they are and that they understand the work to be done ahead. We collaborate on advocacy to advance workplace and national policies. We've been fortunate to be able to work with companies that are, some of them are committed to advancing policy to national, sometimes global level. And so we've been able to work with them to try to do that. And then also in co-developing awareness and behavior change campaigns. When we do this, we do note that campaigns might not be effective just in and by themselves, but when paired with some of the other programmatic approaches that Promundo also does in communities, we're able to actually see some great impact from that. So kind of getting into more of the specifics, I thought, well, what could I, sort of bring in within this time frame to get to the root of what I think really does make a difference. And so there are two really basic things. One is, and it's funny in a way, it's sort of, I talk about in the work that I do, a lot of it is very similar to relationships in a way, which is pick the right partner and then, prioritize alignment, making sure that you're basically on the same page in more or less words. But in terms of picking the right partner, Promundo has actually developed a pretty extensive due diligence process that takes a look at everything from the industry to business practices to workplace practices. When you're looking at industry, you know, one of the major notes is have a lens on sort of where your hard lines are. Are there industries that are actually sort of working counter to your mission and what you are trying to achieve in the world? For us, we are working to prevent violence. So we, you know, we don't work in industries that promote violence or industries that create tools for violence. So that's just a note, is one of the things to think about. In terms of business, also counter to your mission, are they doing things in a way that would really sort of, you know, that in a way that actually contributes to the advancement of gender equality? And then the same is with workplace practices. So it's not enough to be out in the world doing things the right way if you're treating people within your workplace in ways that are, you know, run counter to that. So we also do an assessment and as best as we can to better understand what's happening within that workplace. Are they leading on gender equality initiatives? Are they at least interested in trying to, you know, better their practices in that sense? So really, this is it seems like, you know, one of the most basic things, but it really is one of the most critical factors that will determine whether or not your partnership is going to be successful. Because this is something that never goes away. So if they are doing things in a way that are not in alignment with how you work and what you're trying to achieve in the world, that'll continue to come up every time you're trying to make a decision or decide on priorities for your work together. And so in terms of prioritizing alignment, so the association part, that's very much sort of comes out of that due diligence process of picking the right person. So you know, just a kind of a pithy way of stating that is to protect your brand. As organizations, we also do have brands, and we work very hard to maintain our credibility, and that really is around making sure that everything that we're doing is very much mission driven, and that we are have a level of accountability in the way that we engage in the world. So this is you know, one of the most important factors. We want to make sure that you know, the question that we ask is, would affiliation with this partner run counter to your mission and or harm your credibility in the key areas in which your organization works? And so in order to answer that question, you go through that due diligence process. In terms of your alignment, in terms of the market that they're working in, often, you know, companies might, in your partnership, they might identify a certain area or region that they'd like to work in. And here, you know, my note is to stick to the plan. If you are working in regions and you're doing that for specific reasons, and they're proposing that you work elsewhere, and that doesn't align with, you know, your strategic plan or your pathway to success, then make sure that you're open about that, and make sure that you take the opportunity to try to explain and help them understand sort of where you're focused. Oftentimes there might be flexibility for them to expand into another region or to think about you know, how you can collaborate in a way that's most impactful. In terms of scope, this is really sort of a lens on the activities that you might be engaged in together. Be transparent. I think a lot of times when people have the opportunity to work with a company, sort of feeling like, you know, there's this huge entity and you're this, you know, organization, some of us smaller than others. And, you know, you might be inclined to try and make what they need or looking for work. Don't do that, because it never serves you in the end. Really stick to what you know that you are good at. Stick to what you know you could really do well to achieve in the space that you're working in. So the question here is, will the proposed activities or opportunities add value to your work or position you to better advance your mission? If they won't do that, then the question is, why are you engaging in that work ultimately? And so don't just work with them in order to work with them. Make sure that working with them is actually helping you advance your mission and better positioning you to you know, advance the value of the work that you're doing. in terms of your objective, really define success. Lead with your objectives and make sure you have clarity on their business objectives. Ultimately, that's going to be what's guiding a lot of the decisions that they're making. And so, have that conversation very early on so that you have clarity on what they're looking for, and you better understand how you can position a lot of the work that you'd like to do with them in a way that allows you to help them meet those business objectives, but in a way that is true to your organization and ensures that the people that you're and communities that you're working with are taken care of, and that you're able to really identify objectives that are measurable and impactful, and ultimately help you achieve your mission. And then the last note is with budget, that money isn't everything. And I know often a lot of organizations look to work with the private sector because of the resources that are there. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen is people potentially wanting to step away from an engagement because the fiscal support is lower before they've actually looked to see the value of the in-kind, the potential in-kind support, which honestly often can be worth far more than the fiscal support when you take the time to kind of sit down and assess how you might be able to do the same kind of work, and when you're really sort of looking at whether or not an engagement makes sense for you, definitely make sure that there's enough budget there to really do the work well. Don't shortchange the work that you're trying to do, because it'll just sort of lead to a messy situation where you're not able to do what you could do well, and make sure that if there isn't enough fiscal support, that you are asking for what might be available in terms of in-kind support. And so just a couple really quick case studies to just give you a sense of how this works. So one of our partners, or group of partners that we work with, is the Caring Foundation. They are a foundation that's dedicated to combating violence against women. And we worked with Caring and Artspace and Fight on an effort to develop and support a new initiative that was focused on reaching boys at much earlier ages than so that we could reach them before they internalize unhealthy messages about manhood. So this is one kind of partnership in which the collaboration was really ultimately about trying to raise enough funds to get this initiative off of the ground. So what we did was, with Caring and Fight On and Artspace, Caring and Fight On developed first most extensive anthology of women artists to date, spanning really shining a light on the work of these women, these female artists, and then from that effort, we actually collaborated with Caring, Fight On, and Artspace to launch a series of limited edition prints by a few of the artists from the book, and the proceeds of the prints actually went to benefit our organization and the engagement, the initiative that we were looking to launch with Caring. And so there we picked the right partner. Caring was really our core partner, in alignment with our mission. And we prioritize alignment, really looking at making sure that the work we were trying to do, and that the objective of the engagement ultimately for all of us was to that the objective of the engagement was to advance gender equality and reduce violence against women and girls. And so I am actually going to stop there because I think I'm running a little bit long, but I do have another case study I can make sure to make it available for you afterwards. Really, that's really what it comes down to, is just really picking the right partner and prioritizing alignment.
Thanks so much, Tolu. That was wonderful. Really, these guidelines are super useful. And we're going to continue zooming into this conversation. So we are going to talk now to Lucia. and to Lauren from Business for Social Responsibility, who are going to give us more tips even. We are really going deeper into this conversation, which is really fantastic. So over to you two. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Angelica. And thanks so much again. We're so pleased to be co-hosting this webinar with SVRI and to have such an excellent group of panelists for this. I'm Lauren Shields. I'm the Associate Director of the HERproject. Lucia is kindly pulling up our slides for us. I think we're going to go back to the beginning of the slideshow. So in the next, I know we're running a little short on time, so we'll try to be speedy and to the point. But in the next 10 minutes, we just want to share another example, really building on the Promundo example of partnering with business, really focusing on a workplace-based intervention, tackling gender-based violence, and share some of our learnings and best practice tips. And so Lucia and I are going to be tag teaming on this. If you could go to the next slide, please, Lucia. First, just to give a bit of a sense of who we are, what is HERproject. So HERproject is a global collaboration between companies, suppliers in the supply chain, and local civil society to support women workers in global supply chains. So really the kind of bread and butter of our work and how we drive impact is in partnership with business. It's really central to how we work and to our mission. So we have a network of companies that we work with, and we have about 50 companies that we're actively working with. So for example, what we have our partners, the Children's Place on the call today, but others such as American Eagle, Nordstrom, Marks and Spencer, Twinings, Target, just to give you a sense of some of them. And with workplace-based programs on three primary areas: on health, financial inclusion, and our third program, HERrespect, which we're going to talk about a bit more today, which looks at promoting gender equality and addressing violence against women. We focus our work in highly feminized supply chains, so a lot in garment and apparel, as well as in agriculture supply chains. So let me turn it over now to Lucia to tell us a bit more about HERrespect.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. So HERrespect, as Lauren mentioned, is one of our pillars. This pillar is focused on encouraging gender equitable attitudes and relationships amongst women and men. And the ultimate goal of our program is to contribute to prevent violence and harassment in the workplace and also beyond, so also in intimate relationships. The particularity of this program is that it is implemented directly on the workplace, so either at factories or at farms in which we are working. And the program has two different areas of intervention. First, we train workers and managers to change their attitudes on gender norms. This is a highly participatory and reflective training. The training equips them with skills to prevent and address violence. So again, both at work and at home and in the community. And finally, we conduct sessions with workers, management, to develop better communication skills in order to create a more productive and a more harmonious workplace environment. The other area of intervention is around improving the policies and practices in the workplace. So we work hand in hand with the management to review the policies, to inform workers about those policies, and to create linkages with community-based organizations and local services. So two things to know, this program is implemented in partnership with NGOs, so local NGOs who are also gender experts, and they really have a deep knowledge of the country of operations. And second, this program was funded with DFID's What Works program, so we're going to hear from DFID later on. The key outcomes of our program. Throughout the program, we conduct baseline and end-line evaluations to measure impact. And we have seen that the program helps to decrease acceptance of violence against women amongst the participants. Also, there's an increased awareness on what constitutes sexual harassment. less acceptance of gender unequal statements, and we have seen that the program contributes to participants feeling empowering in preventing violence. The final point is that this program brings greater awareness of internal support mechanisms, and also it brings higher male engagement. So men are also part of this program, and after the program they maintain more equitable gender attitudes. I would say that the biggest takeaway from the program is that the program supports shifts in attitudes, which is often the most difficult to change. So this is a success that we have noted from the program. So Lauren now is going to tell us what we are hearing from companies. What's the reaction?
Great, thanks, Lucia. So just to speak a bit more about, you know, what do we hear from our network of companies as we're raising issues of gender-based violence and speaking through opportunities to take action. I think what we've seen with our network of companies has really been a shift over the last couple of years, and greater recognition, one, that this is an issue that is critical for companies, and two, that the companies are in a strong position to act. So the first point here is really that gender-based violence absolutely is a business critical issue, that you can see a direct effect on the bottom line. So we have a couple of statistics in here on gender-based violence. So intimate partner violence at home may be contributing to presenteeism. People may be at work, but not fully focused on their work. Of course, harassment and at work also contributes to turnover, absenteeism. So there really is a direct link to business productivity that makes a stronger case for why business should really be involved in this. A second kind of trend that we are seeing is that consumers are really paying attention to this issue in a new way in light of the Me Too movement. This came up higher on the agenda for companies. We've also seen Shruti's evidence earlier on, and I think kind of more broadly we're seeing in the news these days focus on increased risk of domestic violence, and this is something that companies are paying attention to. A third kind of trend or a driver of companies really taking this on board is changes in international standards and kind of governance frameworks. So the ILO's adoption of the Convention on Violence and Harassment in the World of Work really sets the tone about companies' responsibility to take action on these issues. If we can go to the next slide, I just briefly want to say a couple of points. Some of them I think Tolu already addressed really nicely, but I think for us, we really see that there are a lot of opportunities for powerful, impactful partnerships with companies. So I think sometimes we start by thinking about what are the financial resources that companies can bring. But as Tolu was saying, that the in-kind support, the other assets and incentives that companies can bring, we find to be equally important. We should also be thinking about, when we're looking at the workplace, what we've found through our work is that providing support in a workplace setting is a way to reach women who may not be able to participate in the same way in community-based programming. So it's a way to enhance scale and reach as well. This work with companies is not without challenges. So I think we're still, awareness raising is still really key with companies to understand more about what they can do, what are effective responses that they can implement at business level within supply chains, and it's certainly a sensitive topic still for companies. I think the takeaway for us there really is that's why partnership is really critical. I think many of the organizations joining us today really do have the skill sets and experience to really drive this agenda forward, and companies would really benefit from that expertise. So let me turn it back over to you, Lucia, to tell us a few tips.
So these are tips that we gathered from our experience in the ground. So engaging with companies, both as funders, but also as partners for workplace-based interventions. So I think Tolu already covered that one of the first things is to understand the industry, the environment, to make sure that the company is a good fit and that there is alignment in terms of values and of mission. Something else is that when you're approaching a company, a tip would be to really make sure that you showcase the relevant experiences that you have, what value you can bring, and share that in terms of quantitative and qualitative impact of your interventions. To build trust by providing references, this is also something that we have seen works very well. So when a company can already see that you have either worked with other companies or with reputable institutions that can vouch for you. Another tip would be to really prepare the business and social case of a GBV intervention, because many companies don't consider tackling GBV as a business priority, and they don't immediately see the relevance. So this is why we have seen that it works very well to really come already with the both business and social case in hand and clearly communicate what are the benefits for the company to either fund the program or partner to roll out an intervention. Always keep in mind the business commitments that the company might have. So review the company's strategy, the objectives, and especially take a look at those companies that are already engaging in women's empowerment or that have clear commitments around worker safety and well-being. To offer your expertise, I think this is the key. A key element, because companies don't necessarily have the gender expertise, and this is where you bring really something that makes you a key partner for companies that want to engage in these topics. In terms of do's and don'ts, I would say adapting the vocabulary. So many people come from a development or academic backgrounds. Companies don't necessarily master those concepts, so make sure that you keep the complexity of the issue, because it is a sensitive and complex issue, but the language should be adapted. Respect their time. This is also something that we have noted. It's very important to understand that companies operate under very thin margins, so time is key for them. And finally, flexibility. So be ready to change your plans to adapt to their constraints, and also in terms of negotiations, understand what are the nice to haves, what are the non-negotiables for your program, and where there is room for negotiation in terms of pricing and in terms of programmatic priorities. So thank you very much. And over to Thulani.
Thulani, you're in mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to talk very briefly about the work that we've done with the HERproject. I'm based in Africa, so we've implemented this program in 2 countries in the last 2 years. We've completed 2 programs in Kenya, and we've completed 1 in Ethiopia. And we have 5 programs that are going on currently in Ethiopia. And we implementing a blended program. So it's HERhealth and HERrespect, but I wanted just to touch very briefly on the HERrespect. As a company, as a Children's Place, we've invested in a number of initiatives which support the company's worker well-being program, and to ensure that our activities are aligned with the company values, which are to improve the workers' lives and strengthen the factory productivity. We do know that gender-based violence is a reputational risk for us as a business. We have, in the countries that we work in both Ethiopia and Kenya, they have implemented legislation on sexual harassment, where as employers or as business, we actually can face legal liability. In implementing these programs, and I think some of you will not understand the industry, Kenya is a little bit well established as a garment industry, but Ethiopia is very new, and we're actually working with workers who have been working mainly in subsistence agriculture, so they're not used to the rigors of a controlled workspace like a factory, and they're very vulnerable as a result. And so we needed to have a program that looks at preventing or at best minimizing gender-based violence in the factory. And our target was as from 2018 to 2020 to reach out at about 10,000 workers. I think the learnings from the HERproject for us of HERrespect are very identical to what the HERproject team has just shared. We've seen a shift comparing the baseline study or survey that was done and the endline survey. We've noted a shift in attitude of management and workers after they've gone through the program over the 8 modules, 4 modules focusing on HERrespect. We've seen a shift in attitude of both management and workers towards gender-based violence and harassment. We've also seen improvement in worker to management relationships, and some of these workers that have gone through the program have been promoted to supervisory roles, which is an important improvement in the sense that in order for us to address gender-based violence, it's important to develop and promote gender equality and also advance the positions of women in our industry. We've seen a decrease in acceptance of gender-based violence with both management and workers not accepting it as normal, whereas in the past it was seen as normal. Those that have gone through the program, they realize that it's actually not normal to resort to violence. We are seeing an improvement in workplace policies. There's still a lot of work to be done, but there is an improvement in workplace policies and grievance redressal mechanisms to ensure that the workplaces are safe. And we also observing some improved self-confidence in workers, and they actually can express themselves better to their superiors and also engage in dialogue. And this is for us a very good positive step. There's again still a lot of work to be done, and for the workplaces to be normal. They're not yet normal because there's still cases of gender-based violence. I think in terms of partnership with the NGO sector, we need each other, and we need each other more than before. I think as business you are able to implement to promote gender equality and to provide supportive workplace policies and procedures with other parties in the workplace to improve the workplace. But the NGOs have the grassroots experience. They understand the local setting. And as such, you can develop and tailor-make the programs to suit the community where we operate. And we need the NGO sector for that. It's also important, though, I need to highlight that sometimes business is very skeptical of the intentions of the NGO sector. And I think it might be obvious for you in some situations we have NGOs that are not constructive in their approach, and some are very constructive. So it's very important that you win over the confidence of the business and show them a constructive way. And work with NGOs with proven record. For us, it has helped to work with NGOs with proven record in community where we work. And so I think that that's an attitude and approach that you need to be taking as an NGO sector. Understand that there are a lot of initiatives, especially new countries like Ethiopia. There would be a lot of initiatives going on, and sometimes factories just feel the project fatigue. There's just too many projects that they handle. They have to deal with each brand asking for this and that, and the NGOs also asking for many other things. So in some situations, you will need to collaborate with others to reduce the number of programs. And I think without highlighting other points that were raised by the other team members on this panel, I think this is one issue I want to highlight, that there is a lot of initiatives going on. And so the NGOs are possible to collaborate with each other so that the factories can manage to handle the projects that come their way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thulani. That was fantastic to hear, the progression from these principles to these very practical tips and what you have experienced as a business person, engaging in this issue and showing us what we can really do here. So now I would move over to Raania from DFID, who would tell us from a perspective of a donor, why do you think it's worthwhile to support this type of initiatives? And you have been working with HERrespect particularly. So over to you, Raania.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. I'm just trying to start my video, which I can't seem to do. So why should DFID be working in gender-based violence? It's part of DFID's strategic pillars to engage with gender equality and uphold gender equality. Violence against women and girls is definitely preventable. And this is shown by DFID's flagship program, the What Works program, which has run between 2013 and 2019. It rigorously tested interventions in a variety of countries, including Pakistan and DRC. And it has demonstrated that tackling values and behaviors in schools, homes, and communities reduce violence to a significant level. And we need to be able to include the private sector within these studies now. In June 2019, the Secretary of State for DFID approved the next phase. This is a colossal amount of money. It's 67 million pounds, and it's to extend the What Works program at impact to scale. It will be testing these approaches and interventions in new areas, including conflict and human areas, the most marginalized, and they will also be engaging with the private sector too. The success of the What Works program, the formal What Works program, has really raised awareness and interest across other departments at DFID. And the outcomes clearly demonstrate that the public sector needs to be involved in preventing gender-based violence quite proactively. Why should the private sector engage? Just generally, not just DFID, but why? Well, because there's a huge economic cost when there's gender-based violence prevalent. I think this figure has been quoted before in this session, but in Cambodia, workplace sexual harassment has cost the garments industry about 89 million per year. And this is an enormous amount that could be solved. Again, the ILO convention has been mentioned, so I won't go into it, but in June 2019, there was a groundbreaking convention that was adopted by the ILO and countries to combat violence and harassment in the world of work. The world of work is really important phraseology here because it extends to workers who don't have formal contracts, and it extends to the world of work as in commuting to and from work. So many garments workers across countries who commute to and from work and experience some kind of gender-based violence, whether it be through the factory or outside, of this convention will require a very comprehensive response from private sector companies and their commitment to GBH. And this is why it's so important. Why private sector engage in GBV and why are we doing it and how are we doing it? So the private sector recognizes that its partners and companies have a moral and ethical responsibility to address violence in the workplace. We want to achieve the UN SDG goals, especially, and violence against women, especially comes into 5 on gender equality, and decent work and inclusive growth, which is SDG 8. This will definitely require addressing the perverse practices of gender-based violence in domestic and spheres as well as workplaces. How are we doing it? We're ensuring that gender-based violence is integrated into all PSD program cycles and fulfills the commitments to the UNGPs, which are the United Nations Guiding Principles. They're the authoritative global standard in business and human rights, and we deal with businesses. And lastly, what are we doing with COVID at the moment? So the private sector is responding to COVID, and it has been an immediate. We know that COVID has increased occurrence of violences. Private sector is responding to this. They have funded the Business Fights Poverty toolkits to deal with COVID response in the private sector, vulnerable supply chains, and gender-based violence. These can be found on the Business Fights Poverty website. The private sector has also launched the Vulnerable Supply Chain Facility in response to global supply chains falling apart and vulnerable workers being at risk of gender-based violence. This is particularly for garments and agriculture. And the last way that we're doing this is to consider the effects and the prevention of gender-based violence across all of our programs. So that's where we are now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think I will need Angelica's help in doing this because I can't seem to stop sharing the screen. And I'm also supposed to be summing up my panelists, my fellow panelists. So Liesle, would you like me to continue with that?
Yes, please, if you're okay. We have still 76 people in, participating. So I think it's worthwhile to continue just for 15 minutes. So Raania, please go ahead, and that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to thank all the panelists for really insightful presentations. And Shruti has demonstrated the importance of really robust monitoring and evaluation components within programs, even very immediate programs in the face of COVID, because they give us information about how pathways can affect violence. Shruti has also outlined how important it is for high-level funding and programs to engage with local-level community-based organizations. And this provides really important local-level information and context-specific information. And I know that we're short of time, so I'm going to unfortunately bundle Lucia, Lauren, Thulani, and Pino all together and say that they were fantastic presentations on implement and engage with the private sector. And what came out of them for all of me, what was really important was that Promundo is engaging with men. In the narrative across gender-based violence, we often forget that we need to speak about men and boys and the essential engagement of them into our programming. The fact that the engagement with private sector needs to be multi-stakeholder. It's got to be across community-based organizations and brands and consumers and of course funders. The other thing I really wanted to point out from possibly a personal point of view is Thulani's point about factories feeling fatigued and overworked and suppliers feeling that they have been slighted against in this fight against gender-based violence. Brands have an enormous responsibility to help suppliers meet costs of being able to fight gender-based violence and all other kinds of human rights upholding. It is not just about suppliers, it's not just about brands, it is about everybody together. So I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to point out very quickly that the guidance given by all of the presentations is really excellent on implementation. And I know there are some questions that I've been looking at about how do we get the private sector to engage. So one of the questions is about why should the private sector engage? It is hugely a reputational risk. If we even forget about the compelling moral responsibility we have as the private sector, there is a reputational risk that is involved here. And that reputational risk, as we have more and more private sector companies engaging and finding appetite to deal with GBV, we will find the ones who don't want to left behind, and it will be impactful on them eventually. And that's what we would hope for. So that's all that I have to say. I'm sorry that I've had to sum up 3 presentations in one, but there's a shortage of time, I believe. So thank you very much, everybody. And the presentations are available, I believe, as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Raania. I think you made key points. So this is not just, it's not just about human rights, it also makes business sense. I think that's also one of the key messages here. But foremost, it's a human rights issue, women's rights issue, and we would like the private sector engaged in this struggle. So just to say that we are going a bit over, but we are going to produce a brief, short document with the presentations, some of your comments on the chat too, very interesting comments, very interesting points, some experiences already. So we are going to produce this brief, we are going to share it through the SVR platforms and online too. And yeah, I think it's just closing, thinking of, I don't know if you heard about the Hawaiian government promoting a feminist economic kind of plan for recovery after COVID. So it's something we should be pushing as feminists, as gender activists. We know it's going to be a huge aftermath of the COVID. What are we going to do? Do we want to change some of the way we live, we do economy in our world? And how is that going to have an impact on women? What can we do then? So just food for thought, follow that news about a feminist economic plan for recovery after aftermath. And what would be the role of governments and the private sector in this space? Would we be open to work differently as a private sector? So that would be plenty to think about that too. So just closing, and thank you so much. We had over 100 participants, 66 still listening to us. Thanks for your participation. Thanks to the panelists, it was great. And yeah, we hope we continue this conversation and have a good afternoon. Sorry.
All the questions in the chat, and we recognize them, we've read them, and what we will do is, unfortunately, because we have run out of time, we're going to send the questions back to the panelists and ask them to respond to them in writing. If you don't mind, panelists, we will ask you to do that. And we have everybody's contact details who have registered for the event, and we will send back the answers to you. We'll hopefully get that back to you within a week. And we also want to start a series of webinars. So if you have any thoughts and ideas, please write to us. Let us know what you'd like us to take forward coming out of this conversation. And again, thanks for your participation. It's been brilliant. We look forward to working with all of you, and the panelists have been amazing. Thank you once again. Back to you, Angelica.
That's all. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a good afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world, and we will follow up the conversation. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Angelica. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.